Right now, you feel like you're fully awake. But that's the trick, because awake isn't one state. It's just the state you're used to calling normal. Your mind moves through different modes: focused, drifting, emotional, automatic, and each one changes what feels true. If you've ever said, "Why did I do that?" or "That doesn't feel like me," you weren't broken. You were in a different state of consciousness. If you like videos that uncover the hidden origins of everyday life, subscribe to Originify, and let's keep wondering together. We talk about consciousness like it's a light switch, on, off. But in reality, consciousness behaves more like weather. It changes, it drifts, it storms, it clears, and you can live an entire day under one kind of sky without realizing a different sky exists. That's why your self feels inconsistent. You can be brave in the morning and anxious at night. You can be disciplined for a week and then fall into old habits like gravity return. You can feel deeply connected one moment and completely detached the next. Most people interpret this as a personality problem, but it's often something more basic. You weren't the same version of conscious awareness. States of consciousness are not mystical. They're functional. Your brain moves between states to manage energy, attention, emotion, social safety, prediction. Your mind doesn't ask, "Who am I today?" It asks, "What state keeps me safest, most efficient, most stable right now?" That state becomes your reality. And the deeper you go, the more unsettling the question becomes: how much of your life is you, and how much is just the state you were in? Let's start with the most familiar state, the one you call normal. You're awake, you're functional, you're reading, working, responding, surviving. But even this normal state is not constant. Sometimes you're alert and present. Sometimes you're numb and autopilot. Sometimes you're anxious without reason. And behind that, there's something even more important. Most of your waking life is not spent in deep focus. It's spent in a wandering state, a background mode where your mind drifts, simulates, and replays. This is the mind's default setting. The moment there's no urgent task, your brain returns to it like a river returning to its channel. And what does it do there? It builds your identity. It replays the past, searching for patterns. It imagines the future, searching for threats. It runs social simulations. What did they mean by that? What should I have said? Will this happen again? This is why you can be sitting still, doing nothing, and still feel exhausted. Because the mind never truly rests. It simply changes state. And here's the hook. The default state can be creative, healing, and insightful, or it can become a cage, depending on which direction it drifts. Then there's the state people chase: focus, the state where you feel sharp, clear, productive, like the world finally makes sense. In this state, attention narrows. Your brain becomes a spotlight, and everything outside the beam fades. This can feel powerful, but it has a cost, because focus is not just attention, it's also exclusion. When you enter deep focus, your mind suppresses wandering, emotion, processing, background body signals, social scanning. That's why you can work for hours and forget to eat. Why you can hyperfocus and ignore your own discomfort. This state is excellent for building something, but it can also become a trap, because if your life becomes nothing but forced focus, task after task, productivity as identity, your mind loses permission to wander. And wandering isn't a weakness. Wandering is how your brain integrates your life. So the modern world does something strange. It demands constant focus, then punishes you when your mind breaks into drift. We call it distraction. We call it laziness. But it might simply be your brain switching states because it needs to recover. And when the brain can't recover through rest, it recovers through escape. Which takes us to the next state, the emotional state. In an emotional state, something dramatic happens. Your perception changes, not just what you feel, what you believe. When anxiety rises, the world becomes threatening. When shame rises, the world becomes judgmental. When loneliness rises, the world becomes distant. When anger rises, the world becomes unfair. You don't simply have an emotion, you enter an emotional lens, a state of consciousness that rewrites meaning. This is why arguments feel impossible in the moment, because you're not just disagreeing on facts, you're living in different psychological realities. And your brain does not treat emotions as opinions. It treats them as signals of survival. That's why an anxious mind can't be convinced by logic. Logic lives in a different state. The emotional state is older than language. It reaches the body first, heart rate, breath, tension, and then hands the conscious mind a story that fits the feeling. In this state, your mind makes fast meaning. They don't like me. I'm failing. This is going to end badly. Not because it's true, but because in that state, it feels true. And the most important part, you are not choosing your thoughts. Your state is generating them. Once you understand that, you stop asking, why am I thinking this? And you start asking the better question, what state am I in right now? Because that question restores power. There's a state people rarely talk about, the automatic state. It looks like wakefulness from the outside, but internally, something is missing. Presence. In this state, you do things without fully experiencing them. Scrolling, eating, walking, responding, working, even talking. And afterward you realize, I don't remember doing that. This isn't weakness. This is efficiency. The subconscious takes over when tasks are repetitive, stress is high, attention is depleted, emotions are uncomfortable. It's the brain's survival mode for modern life. The problem is that this state doesn't just automate behavior, it automates identity. When you live too long in automatic mode, you become less aware of what you truly want, what you truly feel, what you truly believe. Life becomes something you manage, not something you live. And then one day you wake up with a strange thought. How did I get here? That moment is often interpreted as crisis, but it might be something else. A shift in state. The return of consciousness. And that leads to the most powerful state of all, the reflective state. Reflection is a different kind of consciousness. It isn't thinking, it's seeing. It's the moment you notice your pattern while it is happening. Not afterward, not later. Now, in the reflective state, you become the observer of your own mind. And this is where change becomes possible, because you can't change a pattern you can't see. This state often arrives in quiet places, late at night, walking alone, after a breakup, after a mistake, in silence, in nature. It can feel painful, because reflection often reveals what the automatic state hid. But it can also feel like relief, because it returns you to authorship. And here's a paradox. People say they want self-awareness, but they fear the discomfort it brings, because awareness isn't always comforting. Sometimes awareness means admitting you've been avoiding your life. You've been living for approval. You've been repeating a story that isn't yours. And yet, this is the state that creates freedom. Not freedom from emotion, freedom from unconscious repetition. So how do you work with states of consciousness? You don't control them like switches. You influence them like weather. By changing conditions, here are 3 practical levers your brain actually responds to. 1. Attention. What you repeatedly focus on becomes your state's fuel. Short, intentional focus periods are more powerful than forcing focus all day. 2. Body, breath, posture, movement, sleep. These are state controls. You can't think your way out of anxiety if the body is still signaling threat. 3. Environment. Your mind becomes the room you live in. Noise, notifications, social pressure, clutter, these keep you in automatic states. The goal isn't to live in one best state. The goal is to recognize which state you're in and choose whether it's serving you. Because once you can name the state, it loses some of its power. You stop identifying with every thought. You stop believing every feeling is a fact. You stop calling autopilot who you are. You begin to see your mind as a system, not a verdict. And that is the beginning of real consciousness. You are not one version of yourself. You are a shifting mind moving through states, and each state changes what feels true. That's why you can promise something in one moment and break it in another. That's why you can feel confident one day and disappear the next. It wasn't that you became weaker, you changed state. And once you start noticing these shifts, you stop living inside them blindly. You begin to live with awareness. This is Originify, where we undiscover the hidden forces shaping everyday life and uncover the quiet truths behind what it means to be human. If this video helped you see your mind differently, like it, subscribe, and join us for the next episode. Because once you understand your states, you start understanding your life.